Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. How you doing? This is me, your host, Preacher Moss. I'm calling this a serene and sit back Sunday. I hope all is well. You have a great weekend, or you're having a great conclusion to your weekend. Today's subject matter is I wanted to move away from the more inflammatory stuff, be a little bit more reflective on behalf of myself and people that tune in. As always, I'd like to thank new viewers for coming in and joining us in as well. I want to thank the people that continue to come back and join us. Today's topic, the banner, as you can see, is called When the Dust Settles. And I settled on this because we have a lot of things going on socially. There's a lot of angst, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of pent up frustration, there's a lot of feelings of justice denied, justice obstructed. There's the idea of instead of equality, there's it's entitlement. You have a lot of things going on, but I tried to be forward looking with this process, with this show today specifically. And I asked the question, what's next? But I put it in a framework of when the dust settles. I chose the framework of, or the metaphor, if you will, of when the dust settles because I thought of George Floyd. By this time next week, he most likely will be buried. And it's interesting. I said before, he's had four memorial services: Minneapolis, I think, Charlotte, and two in Houston. And it's an extraordinary thing. I'm sure this is a monumental situation for a lot of people, but it's tough in the way that we're not able to really, aside from everything, mourn properly the death of this individual, whether we know him or not. It's a politicized funeral, for lack of a better word. But I looked at the words when the dust settled, and I tried to be a little bit reflexive in my thinking because a lot of times when we hear when the dust settles, like when you go to a funeral, the last word that you know that's over, they say from ashes to ashes and dust to dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And it hit me one time that that is the final line for that person who's been lowered into the ground. But what about the other people? What about when the dust settles for them? Not that you're going to be lowered in the ground, but there's an expectation of how you're going to live afterwards. I'm looking at the situation and I'm really trying to frame out a little bit more about how we reframe things, how we, uh, if you will, we pick up the pieces of what we were, what we thought we were, and move forward as a community and society. Let me give a quick shout out. How you doing, Sister Jasmine? Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, all the way from the UK. Thank you for tuning in. I think what we had is, hey, what's going on, Big House? I'm gonna give him a shout out too. What's going on, brother? In Dubai, man. Love you, man. Assalamu alaikum. But this idea of when the dust settled, I am worried. I am worried, brothers and sisters, because I'm trying to figure out, will we be mentally, emotionally, spiritually prepared to move forward? Sometimes in these things, folks forget history. Brother Mark Manley, man, Mark Manley from California, up in, I think he's right outside LA. He posted something today, and he said it was like the 20th anniversary of the killing of James Byrd. Now, the people who don't know James Byrd, his death was a landmark in terms of hate crimes. And what was even more amazing is that they took so long to make this a hate crime. I'm going to give you some quick statistics on this murder. Black men, three white people, three white men. Make sure the kids are out of the room because this is pretty graphic. But three drunken white men saw him walking. They grabbed him. Uh, they beat him. They chained him behind the back of a car. a truck, if you will, and they dragged him 3 miles to his death. 3 miles to his death, which included a horrific death, a decapitation. We're talking about a lot of just physical pain. And it did not receive the amount of protest, activism, outrage that we're getting right now. Now, this is totally different because it's a different age. Social media, things are allowed to congeal, if you will, and people are able to make that happen. Let me give a big shout out. Thanks for coming back, brother McCall. Appreciate you, brother. But we didn't happen. In fact, literally the only response, the major response from the black community was actually Minister Khalil Muhammad after he had been removed from the Nation of Islam as a national spokesman. He headed a group called the New Black Panther Party, and they went down and they had the open carry down in Jasper, Texas. My point is, when that dust settled, we thought there were going to be change. Someone asked me, how come you're not protesting? How come you're out in the streets with the people? And I honestly said, you know what? I've been out there in the streets with the people. I've been out in the streets with the people. I've protested. I've sacrificed. I've been harassed by police, suspended. I've lost jobs. I've done all those things. That's it. And at this point in time, I'm looking at it. I said, nothing has changed except for I've gotten older. And maybe this time around, I'm going to be a little bit more introspective and be a little bit more critical about my thinking. Because at this point in time, I've told people that marching doesn't change anything. Marching and protesting doesn't change anything. It soothes an emotional need, but if you're not making laws, you're not determining policy, it doesn't change anything. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't go out and protest and stand up for justice. Yes, standing up for justice and fighting for justice over a continuous period of time is different. You have to realize that sacrifice can't stop with James Byrd, the same way it can't stop with Mr. George Floyd. It has to be over a continuum because even as we sit here, there have been even more cases of police brutality and Black men being murdered by police. You can't avoid that. You can't say that that's any more important or George Floyd is any more important than that. And I'm trying to put it in the most general terms. But as we begin to look and the dust settles, what are some of the issues that you're looking to see changed? George Floyd wound up in Minnesota because he was looking for work, which speaks to the fact there wasn't a sufficient amount of work. He's trying to provide for his family. He also suffered on the aspect of being a felon. Now, I'm not talking about being a felon. No. I'm talking about the aspect of how society treats ex-felons. So he was in a situation whereby literally his social mobility was impaired. And I'm trying to put this out here in a very logical way because with all of the protests and things like that, I get it, brothers and sisters. Sound like Sister Layla? I get it, but we have to go back to an old frame, an old spirit type of thing whereby our parents, particularly African American parents, parents of minorities, Native American, they taught us how to comport. We could compartmentalize things. We can compartmentalize things. I remember I talked about those Sundays with your grandma and those dinners Sunday. That was grandma's way of compartmentalizing things for you. From the madness that you dealt with from Monday to Friday, at least maybe Saturday, but definitely Sunday, you had a time to step back and deal with your own agency. When it does settle, we will be able to deal with our own agency. When I mean deal with your own agency, I mean, listen, can you speak to the issues and the facts that are currently affecting your life? Are we projecting on other people what we feel as opposed to dealing with our own situations and scenarios? I have to say that I have to pull back sometimes. I talked about that earlier. Sometimes we protest things, we jump justice for that person because it's easier than trying to get justice for ourselves. The big picture, brothers and sisters, like, yes, there has to be change. But change is not something that's going to happen with protests. Change is not something going to even happen with boycotts. Change is going to have to be being able to sit in front of the people that you want to see change and make a compelling argument. Make an aggressive and a compelling argument that's sustainable and you can scale up over time. What I'm talking about compelling arguments. Religion, if you will, is something that is a compelling argument. You can scale up over a period of time. The religions of Islam, if you will, is not a absolute religion. It's a religion that began with an idea and expanded, and the ideas that came out of it supported the original ideas. Even as we talk about politics and things of that nature, there's some things that you have to be very, very careful about. The situation, the scenario that we have now speaks to the fact, will we have resolve when the dust settles? When the cameras aren't on, when there's not a sense of community and standing up for what's right, what's wrong, and even identifying the wrong in our own community and the wrong we do. So that's that part about projecting. It begs the issue that maybe we need to step back and work on being complete people. You know, there's a saying about funerals. I know, I'm not gonna say black funerals, but we sometimes we lose contact with one another, and the only time we see one another is when somebody dies. And we can get together and we'll say, "Oh, so and so passed away," and we have great stories, and we eat food at the repast, and then we go away, and then you don't see them until somebody else has passed. You know, and I've literally been in a conversation, listening to a conversation with so and so, not so and so, but my grandmother. "Hey, when last time we saw someone?" They'll go, "Oh, when Junior died. Yeah, I saw him when Junior died." And we do have that mentality. But between that time, brothers and sisters, can we develop some type of modality where we help one another to remind ourselves of these things, and not just remind ourselves in a negative way, but remind ourselves that we need to be constantly creative and critically thinking about how we address situations, scenarios that affect us negatively. Yesterday, I did a talk about white supremacy, serial killers, and dollar stores. And I made the connection between all three. Two of the things that I said most about serial killers and white supremacists is they're both very patient and they're both very deliberate. Well, when the dust settles, is it possible that we can be very patient and very deliberate about our emotional intelligence, about how we plan for the future, and how we strategize for equality and justice? One of the saddest things in the world is to see a child go through the motions of an activity with full expectation that they're going to fail. And they go through it with full expectation that they're going to fail. Well, I have news for you. That child grows up. That child grows up, holds jobs, has other children, wives, positions, and that thing internally never goes away unless you effectively resolve it. This time around, if you will, when the dust settles, I want to see a little bit more accountability from us before somebody dies, before somebody is injustice is visited on somebody else. I think it's important that we be preemptive. I'm not 100% sure how it is to be preemptive. I try to do it in my own life, my own business, but it's understanding that the next situation is right around the corner. It's understanding that not too far beneath the surface is another situation, a scenario that we're going to be called into action to. So I would suggest, as they say in the old nation of Islam, General Order Number 5, which reads something like this. I'm paraphrasing. General Order Number 5: do not leave your post until properly relieved. Again, that's do not leave your post until properly relieved. What we have situation now, when the dust settles, people think that they have been properly relieved. They have not. The justice that George Floyd did not receive is the same justice that William Byrd did not receive, is the same justice that Terrence Johnson did not receive, is the same justice that Sandra Bland did not receive. We're settling for acknowledgement of crimes. We're not demanding in a real tactical, specific way. We want the law executed the way it's been executed on us. Now, this beginning to get a little bit blurry, and I apologize because I'm asking you, like I'm asking myself, to cut off the television, cut off the radio, look at what's happened in your mind, and think beyond it. Find a framework to look beyond it. You know, there was a situation one time where my mother took ill, and I remember it really, really vividly because everything was okay till my mother wasn't able to walk, and I refused to look beyond the fact that my mother couldn't walk. I literally was like, "Come on, it'll come back. Maybe your legs are dead or whatever, or your legs asleep or whatever." And it didn't hit me till I was trying to help her go to the bathroom. She wanted to crawl. I was trying to do the wheelchair, and she fell out of a wheelchair, fell and chipped a tooth on the bathroom floor. And there was blood, and it was very emotional. I mean, I'm crying, she's crying. I mean, I literally put my hands in the air. I was like, "Oh Lord, what do I do?" Because I realized there was nothing that I had gone through at that point to prepare me for that. And when the dust settled, my mother and I prayed together and we had a conversation. The conversation went something like this. I said, "Mom, I don't know what I'm doing." She said, "That's right." I can see that. But she said something, and I remember this. She said, "Well, why don't you clear up the blood and I can get my tooth fixed? But where do we go from here?" Meaning, what do we do after the dust settles? And we came to an understanding. The one was we didn't know what was going to happen next, but we had to value where we were as a context. So when we move forward, we can scale it up, if you will. And what we came to was an understanding between a mother and a son in a situation where we didn't know. She didn't know about her health. I didn't know how to deal with her health. And what was interesting was we both came to this beautiful understanding that this situation with her health and her not walking, this may be at this point in time the best it's ever going to be moving forward. We literally said we wanted to be better, but this might be the best that God can do right now and appreciate it. And from that point, things got better because I was a little bit more organized. I was definitely a lot less arrogant, and I asked questions. And I began to do something I normally don't do. I reached out to people for resources. I began to trust the people, say, "Hey, I'm here if you need me." And I'm like, maybe I need to call and see if they can help me. And I remember my second cousin Ophelia came by. She's a nurse and she did home health care. And she gave me a lot of things, advice and stuff like that. But it was at that point that we acknowledged that we didn't know, but there was a strength in not knowing. That strength is in not knowing, you're free to be creative. You're free to explore. You're free to get information. You know, there's a situation, a scenario whereby we can get to a particular point, we can get fed up, we can be upset, we can be anxiety riddled, but it doesn't bode well when we're trying to find information. That is the worst filter. You all know this. It's the worst filter you ever want to go through. Trying to get information when you're panicked, you're not in your right state, or you're not in your most excellent state. And it's interesting because when you get to that, as a society, there's a saturation point. I'm not saying that George Floyd is the saturation point for us right now. I don't know. Because I thought maybe William Byrd, James Byrd was the saturation point. I mean, literally being dragged behind a truck 3 miles in chains. I thought that would be it, and it wasn't it. And I thought maybe when I was a kid, Terrence Johnson and the way his life was ruined by the criminal justice system of Prince George's County, state of Maryland, I thought maybe that was it. But then again, as I sit here and I speak with you, as we have a calm demeanor, let's sit here, brother. Thank you, brother. Yes, we do bleed all the same blood. We do bleed all the same blood, brother, but it's not for the same reasons. Um, we have to be careful of that. Everybody has their own narrative. Sometimes we have to respect that narrative. But as I began to wrap this up slowly and try to be very, very deliberate with my words, um, there is responsibility when it does settle. There is accountability when it does settle. And what's ironic is we as religious folks or those who are faith believers, if you will, there is that accountability when you get to ashes, ashes, dust, dust on the other side. You're going to be asked about what you did on this earth. How did you help on this earth? How did you serve on this earth? And that's very valuable. But what before we get there, how about something original? How about we say we're going to have a sustained understanding about how we get to particular points and how we serve? Brother F, I just said, we all bleed the same blood, yes. But I love you, brother. Don't nobody really like to bleed, though. You know, I want the blood to stay inside. That's life giving. When you're bleeding out, there's something wrong. There's a situation, scenario that's not a natural scenario. That being said, ashes to ashes, dust to dust spoke to when the person passes away. I'm asking you, what happens when the dust settles? It's sort of like if you've ever been, you watched a Western movie and you see a stagecoach go through the desert. What is interesting is, it's all kind of dust, but it gives you an announcement that something is coming. There's an expectation. And so when the dust settles, what is our expectation? We are in, I don't want to say perilous times, at different times, but they're not perilous. You know, um, Coronavirus is horrible. We've lost almost 110,000 people. But I said, if you put it in perspective, what's the normal flu count? Not that that makes it right, but I'm like, what's the normal flu count? Because you have to look at normalcy beside things are that we consider irrational. This year in the United States, I bet you that more over almost 700,000 people are going to die from heart disease, heart related drug disease, hypertension, diabetes. I think more of those people are going to pass away than COVID, and we won't talk about them. We'll make COVID the George Floyd moment, but we don't understand that there was a James Byrd before that. And I'm asking people clearly to slow down, slow down, ask critical questions, but more importantly, wait for the answer. That's the only thing I have to say about the protesters. Ask critical questions, but wait for the answers. And when you get the answers, examine the behavior of the people that gave you the answers. I would encourage everybody possibly to go back and watch yesterday's podcast, White Supremacists, Serial Killers, and Dollar Stores. Because I talked about the evil side of things, the decrepit side of things, the deceptive side of things. But there's something on that other side that I need to make sure we revisit the fact that I don't want you to believe or get away from the fact that there's a place in the world for rational behavior and rational thought. The idea of a good being a good, not a good having an agenda, not a good being attached to some type of action or expectation. The purity, if you will, of the human spirit and the purity of the human soul. So ask yourself, when the dust settles, where are you going to be and what are you going to be doing? I almost say, like, I should have done this from my porch, my grandmother's porch, because that's where I feel. And I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of taste of some of that old school wisdom. Asking where we're going to go before we get in the car. Brothers and sisters, that's my podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If not, I appreciate you coming anyway. My thoughts are just my thoughts. I'm not right for what I say, but then again, I'm not wrong for what I say. This is my opinion. I would encourage all of you. If you don't have podcasts, don't be afraid of putting your opinion out and questioning yourself and exploring, if you will. I appreciate everybody, and I Want to give you a shout out, brother. Assalamu alaikum, brother Kazmani. I appreciate you. And in the words of my teacher, one of my teachers, and I'll go on this. This is when I first became Muslim. I had a difficult time because I was listening to all these conflicting stories about how to be Muslim, and nobody talked to me about what happens when the dust settles. That's the dust of when you take Shahada. What happens when the dust settles? When everybody goes away? And I had a hard time, and I was really, really leaning towards leaving Islam. And I went to the mosque, and there was a guy who was a caretaker there, and I poured my heart out to him. He didn't even know me, but he said something. He took me to the side of the building. He said, "Let me show you about Islam." I said, "Okay, brother." He said he took me out to the parking lot. He said, "Look around." I looked around the parking lot. He said, "Do you see any burning bushes out there?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "And there won't be any." He said, Islam is work. Islam is work. So let us do the work when the dust settles. Everybody have an excellent Sunday. I'll be back tomorrow. Inshallah, if it's Allah's will. Stay great. If you can't stay great, stay greater. Preach Moss.